Hey, it's Michael here from Oilers Live. This is the first ever episode of the Heavy Hockey Podcast, and I have as my guest tonight Jack Michaels. The audio was a little bit sketchy because I had him call in, so I did a little bit of a different recording today than I normally would. But bear with it. Jack's a great guy and a great guest, and had a little bit of insight into Oilers rookie camp, what he saw happening, who he thought really surprised him, and some guys to look out for on PTO in the upcoming season. Anyway, I hope you enjoy this episode. It's not too long, and would like to get your thoughts and comments, whether on Twitter or on the website. And looking forward to a great season on the Heavy Hockey Podcast. Of course, starting in the NHL season, when October hits, Oilers Live will be back. But this year, we're going to be doing live broadcasts where you can call in, have some fun on the show, be on the show. Lots of different guests planned this year, lots of exciting things. Plan on doing a collaborative podcast one of these days soon with the gents over at Oilers YYC. So we'll get together and publish a podcast together. Lots of exciting things happening. So keep listening. Stay tuned. Oh, and before I forget, don't forget, December 9th, the Oilers Live Cup is coming to the downtown community arena. Please go to the website, www.oilers.live, for more details, or follow me on Twitter at OilersLive. Please, I don't ask this often, but please subscribe to my podcast on whatever place that you do your podcasts. Subscribe on the YouTube channel, because this year, when I'm doing the live broadcasts, I'll probably be doing a live feed as well. So all of those things help gain some popularity for the podcast. Just allow me to know that people are listening. Subscribe to me on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play. We're really available everywhere. Anyway, enough about me. Let's listen to Jack Michaels. Enjoy the pod today.
From Section 204, Heavy Hockey Podcast with Michael and guests. Heavy hockey isn't dead. It's just getting started.
So, Jack, I want to welcome you. This will end up being the first episode of a new direction for me called the Heavy Hockey Podcast. And so you're going to be, making a little bit of history on the podcast scene as well. One of the things I'm most interested in, Jack, and we talked before we start the recording here about, how I like to get to know a little bit about my guests. What was it like? You've been on the Oilers broadcast since 2010, right?
Correct.
Yeah. And what was it like the year before last, calling your first NHL playoffs? How was that for you?
It was pretty exciting because I had not had a chance to, call a playoff game in a 7-year span at the time, dating to the last game I ever did in the minor leagues. So, I was pretty amped up for it. I think it's fair to say that I was spoiled in the minor leagues from a standpoint of, pretty much every year expecting to call playoff games, and to the degree where the regular season became more of an exercise than anything else. And then you kind of live for playoffs. And with the Oilers the first few years, there really wasn't a chance of that. I mean, as you know, Edmonton, I believe, was, 30th, 29th, 24th, 29th, something along those lines. So you weren't really in the mix. Got a little bit of a sniff during the lockout when, with I believe it was 12 games to go in the season, the Oilers held the 8th playoff spot, and I believe they then dropped 9 of their next 10. And so that was, a brief flirtation with it and some significant games. But, clearly by the time they did make the playoffs in 2017, I was amped up and ready to roll. And, 2 great series. I enjoyed calling them. But the nice thing about the regular season in the NHL, of course, which is much different than, grinding it out in the minors for so many years like I do, is you are seeing the absolute creme de la creme every night. And there are so many nights where I remind myself, like, this is a job. Like, it's almost embarrassing to call it a job. And that's honestly how I feel it. I tell everyone who, starts trying to empathize with me about, the travel, and, you don't get to see your kids, or, look, I see plenty of them in the spring and summer. They are not like lacking a father in the slightest, and I've got the greatest job in the world. I always say my job beats working for a living, and I truly feel that way. So the regular seasons for me, those first few years were really about getting to know the league, getting to know the personnel, and being able to speak intelligently about the other now 30 NHL markets, when at times the Oilers weren't necessarily my chief selling point during the broadcast. And that's honestly the way it went those first few years. And obviously with the recent the drafting of guys like Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, that's changed in a big way. And now it's the Oilers that are always the storyline, no matter which market we go into.
Yeah, it's it's definitely a fantastic fan base and a fantastic team, and I think, you've probably experienced over the past 8 years, just how far it goes. Even on this podcast, some of my regular guests are from around the world, London, Taiwan, Germany, and they're all Oilers fans, various different reasons. But this, fan base extends a long ways. I understand even yourself, you were a bit of an Oilers fan before you made the trek over here.
Well, it's funny. I always say that in my experience, both as a child and then when I got to Alberta, I found out that, even those Canadians who grew up not necessarily with the Oilers as their favorite team, they always seem to be the second favorite team. In other words, the Oilers didn't build up a lot of dislike around the league. When I was a kid, obviously growing up where I did, especially when I was younger, the Penguins weren't really in the mix. Before they drafted Mario Lemieux in 1984, they were a non-entity in Pittsburgh. A lot of people didn't even know they had a team in the NHL. And I'm not kidding you. There was no traction whatsoever. And so as a result, there were a lot of kind of Oiler fans, just because, you got Wayne Gretzky and Mark Messier. And, if you knew anything about hockey, you could probably rattle off, 6 or 7 Oilers. And that's really how I became a fan, because, growing up, really my exposure to hockey was limited to a fuzzy station that came in through Channel 10, which was based out of London, Ontario. And I'd get the second, I'd always talk my dad into watching the second game, because the first game was usually the Leafs getting slaughtered by whoever.
Yeah.
I believe at one point the Leafs lost 21 straight games on Hockey Night in Canada that I watched, because I used to keep track. I was a nerd back then too, trust me.
Yeah.
And so I'd always argue, hey, first game was a blowout. Let me stay up until 9:30, 10 o'clock, and watch the first period of the second game. And that's how I became an Oilers fan, really. And then, the back end of that was when ESPN got the contract from Sports Channel, I believe, in the mid '80s. They started televising these NHL playoff doubleheaders. And so, the first game would come on, whatever it was, 7 Eastern, let's say, and then that second game was at 9:30 Eastern, 7:30 here in Edmonton. But I get that second game. And then, by then I was older, and, I was watching them. By then I was 10 or 11 and being allowed to stay up a little bit later. And then I'd, of course, once I got to 11 o'clock, I'd say, well, the game's almost over. Let me just watch the finish. And that's how I really, I became a tried and true Oiler fan. The other thing is that what happened at the same time was the Penguins finally became respectable with Lemieux, and who were their two arch rivals? Boston and Philadelphia. Well, guess what? I hated those teams, and guess who they played in 4 Stanley Cup Finals?
You bet.
I became a huge Oiler fan almost out of hate, as much as any sort of love for their great players. Because if there was one thing I could not abide back then was the the remote possibility that Boston or Philadelphia could actually raise the Stanley Cup. So I was, cheering hard for the Oilers in 85, 87, 88, and 90. I mean, hard. And, I've always been like that. I for whatever reason, I'm as passionate at rooting against a team as I am rooting for a team. And that's really how I became an Oilers fan.
I'm 100% with you. As those people that listen to my podcast know, I've got two favorite teams, the Oilers and whoever plays the Flames. And I watch both religiously when I can, for sure. So I have to ask, when you were an Oilers fan, you'd been cheering for them to beat your, rival teams. I assume you were in Alaska when the job came up. Would that
correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was in Alaska. Yeah, I was in Alaska from 2002 to 2010.
Did you have any idea you'd be considered for this role? I mean, were you?
No, I almost didn't apply for it. I was actually heading on vacation and on my way to the airport, and there was only one job in the NHL open that summer, and it was Edmonton. And I hadn't even applied for it because I had actually bought a brand new house in Alaska. My kids were starting to get big, and our first house in Alaska was a borderline starter home. I didn't have the foresight to understand that kids get bigger. And so we quickly outgrew our house, and I bought a pretty significant house down the road from my previous location, and was just going to basically live in the big one and rent out the smaller one. I had it all set up, and it was working great for 30 days. And on my way out of town for vacation, I decided at the last minute, in fact, I peeled back to go ahead and throw a demo together and put a resume in there. In fact, I think I hand printed the envelope. I was rushing because we were trying to catch a flight, and I just had this moment where I'm like, I'm going to be out of town for 2 weeks. By then the job will be filled. I might as well, whatever. It's the only job. Who cares? And I just threw my name in there. And it's the classic case of, you can't win the lottery if you don't play it. And that's what happened. I mean, I threw something together. It was respectable enough for me to first get a phone call and then eventually an interview. And, 58 days after I bought that house in Anchorage, I was moving to Edmonton. And in fact, my mother-in-law came up to help move us into the new house, and instead helped us, load everything on 2 semi-trucks and watched it cart off to Canada. That's what ended up happening. So her visit was still timely and still useful, but for vastly different reasons than we ever could have possibly anticipated when she booked those flights.
So I have no doubt that's, probably akin to what it feels like to be drafted on draft day, getting that phone call to tell you you've got the job.
Well, I mean, when I got that far, I mean, here's the perfect capper to it is I went into, it was first time in Alberta, first time really anywhere other than Victoria, BC, and Toronto. So, I mean, I hadn't really been to a real Canadian city in my life. And, obviously for those of you who, know Alberta and know the ins and outs of Edmonton, Calgary is kind of borderline. I mean, Calgary is a pretty transient city, in my opinion. I don't find that there are anywhere near the people from Calgary living in Calgary the way there are people in Edmonton and Sherwood Park and St. Albert, where I live, that are from those areas. I mean, the people that I know who live here have lived here forever. Mm-hmm. And that's really what distinguishes the two cities in my mind, Edmonton and Calgary. But when I came to Edmonton for the first time and did the interview, I thought it went well. But of course, they're on their own schedule, and nothing ever happens that you want desperately. That it never happens quickly. And so we went off, enough time passed that we actually were off on another vacation, and we were in Hawaii, and it was my first day in Hawaii. I think we arrived in Hawaii at 9:00 at night, and the next morning, in fact, I think my wife and I had just ordered a drink at the pool around 11 a.m., and honestly, I got a phone call from Edmonton right there. And then the gentleman had called me, said, "Hold on, I want to get someone else on the phone." And I was like, boy, this would be weird if he's getting someone else on the phone to just tell me I didn't get the job. And sure enough, I was offered the job, and I got to celebrate the next week and a half in Hawaii. So it was about as perfect as you could hope for. I bought a round of drinks for everyone around the pool at the time, and partied like a rock star for the next 8 or 9 days, or at least the kind of rock star with 2 little kids.
Yeah.
In Hawaii could party at the time. But yeah, we had a great time, and it was an ideal type of celebration.
Well, it's fantastic. When I told a couple of friends that I'd have you on the podcast, and they all said they were big fans. I think we're as Oilers fans, we're definitely happy to have you. I read a quote from you today that said you didn't replace Rod Phillips. You came after him. You're the second play-by-play announcer, and I don't think we could have done much better. It's always exciting to hear you call a game. So, thank you for doing that. You do a fantastic job.
Well, and a word on Rod, I had a chance to work with him 10 games and get to know him that first year up in Edmonton. And I still see him from time to time, but especially the first couple years, I'd see him quite frequently. And as good a broadcaster as he was, and he was a Hall of Famer,
yep.
He's a better person. He's a heck of a guy. He could not have been more gracious, and helpful and open. And he's just a really, really nice guy. So, for those of you who didn't get a chance to know him when he was the voice of the Oilers, just a fantastic guy.
Yeah, and that certainly came through in everything I ever saw. So I'd I'd miss out on an opportunity while I have you here. Just a quick couple of thoughts before I let you go for the night. On the Oilers, what you saw. You were out in Red Deer last night, was it, for the rookie game? What maybe a couple names that impressed you, and a couple quick thoughts on what you're expecting as we go into camp. And then one last thing, Spector tweeted out today that Upshaw didn't make past the physical. Upshaw tweeted out an hour ago that he was going to be on the ice. Do you know what's happening there by chance?
I don't, because, these are informal skates. Scotty wasn't at any of them. And, because you're on a PTO, the general manager isn't going to come out and make a statement about a guy who's not even on the roster. So, I suspect if Scotty says he's going to be on the ice tomorrow, then he's going to be on the ice. I don't think he'd make that statement unless he felt like he'd be ready to go in time for tomorrow. Now, having said that, he's obviously got to pass a physical to pass muster and get on the ice.
Mm-hmm.
The Oilers are scheduled, I believe they'll be on the ice sometime mid-morning tomorrow. So we'll find out sooner rather than later. I don't think. To be honest with you, when I look at the PTOs, the guy that really sticks out for me is Alex Chiasson, because he has history with Gulletson both in Dallas and Calgary. So he, in my mind, he's going to have a strong, he's going to be able to make a strong case for himself if he has a decent preseason. Upshaw, having said that, if he's healthy and can get on the ice, here's a guy who's gone the PTO the last couple years and earned contracts with the St. Louis Blues and stuck with them for a whole year. So, certainly don't discount Scotty Upshaw. He'll, if he can find a way, he's going to make it very difficult for the coaching staff to cut him. Rookie camp, for me, 3 standouts, maybe 4. And I would say up front, it's been Tyler Benson
mm-hmm.
and Ryan McLeod, second round picks in 16 and 18 respectively. I think they've been the best forwards. I think they had created the most. I think Benson has among the best vision I've seen from a guy who, has missed so many games over the last several years. He was finally healthy last year and produced in a big way for Vancouver. I think he's an excellent passer. Again, it's based on an extremely small sample size, 2 games, and one of those against really an overmatched squad out of Nate and Grant McEwen. But
yeah.
Tyler Benson has been impressive. McLeod can skate like the wind. He's going to find a place in the league somewhere. And I think the Oilers are hoping that he can blossom a little bit in terms of his finish and his hands around the net. But he's been impressive. And then on the back end, Evan Bouchard has been as advertised in my mind. He's been, I don't know whether I'd go so far as he's been really good. Has he been spectacular? No, but I'm not sure he's ever, going to be a spectacular type of player. But he's been rock solid. He's made very few mistakes. I think he's showed exceptionally well. But the real surprise for me, and far and away the most dynamic guy I've seen, is Caleb Jones. And the reason I say it's surprising is only from the standpoint that he didn't have a great year in Bakersfield last year. I think he was dash 25 and only scored a couple goals. He's been active at both ends of the ice. When he has made a mistake, he's had the speed to cover up. He can really skate. He knows the places to get to in the offensive zone when he is activating from the back end. And I think, that guy in particular has stuck out just because I wasn't really expecting much. I'll be candid, Michael. I just, again, I didn't see him play in Bakersfield. So in some respects, that's not fair. But you look at the numbers and you kind of hear he didn't have the greatest year and, fought it at times. I think he's, in the 2 games he's played, he's been spectacular.
Yeah, I definitely agree on Jones. And he looked great with Bouchard in Calgary when the two of them played.
They've developed a nice little chemistry. And again, I think because Bouchard is so, solid and so dependable and not prone to a mistake that you might think an 18-year-old D-man would make, it's allowed Caleb Jones to explore all facets of his game.
Yeah. Well, you know what? That's great. Those are some definite players we're going to look out for. I wish you the best going into this year, that you get to call some playoff games. I think I speak on behalf of all Oilers fans. And again, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure listening to you on the play-by-play, and enjoy the season. I'd love to have you on again if it works out, and I'm sure, I'll probably listen to you out throughout the season. I'll be at most of the games this year, so I'll be watching live.
Sounds good. More than happy to do it. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks.
From Section 204, Heavy Hockey Podcast with Michael and Guess. Heavy hockey isn't dead. It's just getting started.